The wind swept low across the prairie grass, hissing like the breath of some ancient creature that had never slept. The sky was pale and endless, a cold expanse of winter light. Beneath it, a line of ox-drawn wagons creaked westward, their wheels biting into the frozen earth. Among them walked Elijah Boone, a man hardened by months of travel, his coat patched and stiff with frost, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the land met the sky. Behind him, the plains stretched empty, and ahead, the wilderness waited. It was the year 1843, and every mile west carried both promise and peril. Elijah had started the journey with flour, beans, salt pork, and a small sack of sugar, enough, he had thought, to last until spring. But the frontier had its own calendar, and winter arrived early that year. Snow came in October, heavy and wet, crushing the tall grass and blanketing the plains in silence. Hunting grew harder as game retreated deep into the timber. Streams froze solid. Each night, the fire burned lower, and each morning, his provisions grew lighter. For Elijah and countless settlers like him, food was no longer a comfort. It was survival itself. The campfire cracked as he knelt beside it, holding his hands to the heat. Around him, the other wagons had stopped for the evening. The settlers huddled close, faces orange in the glow. The air smelled of wood smoke and damp wool. A child coughed somewhere in the dark, and Elijah felt the familiar weight of worry settle on his chest. He had seen men starve on the trail, strong men, undone not by storms or wolves, but by the slow emptiness of hunger. He refused to let that fate claim him. In the daylight, he searched the land. The prairie seemed barren at first, a sea of snow and wind. But Elijah knew better. He had learned from trappers, from Shawnee guides, from the old men who had lived by the river valleys long before maps had names. The wilderness, they said, always gave something, if you knew where to look. He scraped through the snow with his boot and found cattail roots, thick and pale as turnips. He boiled them in his tin pot until the water turned brown and bitter, then chewed slowly, savoring their starch. He stripped bark from willow trees for tea, gathered chokecherries when he could find them, and checked his snares each morning for the flash of fur or feather. Elijah remembered a night years before, sitting by a different fire with a Pawnee hunter who had shared a meal of dried meat and berries. The man had called it wasna, food of the old people. It needed no pot, no pan, only hands and patience. That memory became Elijah's guide. He began to see the land not as empty but alive. The roots beneath the snow, the fish under the ice, the rabbits that left faint trails across the drifts, all were gifts waiting to be taken, each a thread in the vast fabric of frontier life. Days passed. The sun rose weakly and fell again before the cold could break. The settlers had begun to ration what little they had left. A cup of flour stretched with acorn meal. Salt pork scraped thin and shared between families. Elijah traded with them when he could. A handful of jerky for a pinch of salt, a story for a spark of hope. In return, he taught them what he had learned: how to dig for wild onions along frozen creek beds, how to spot rose hips for their sharp, sweet fruit, how to roast pine nuts when the firewood was low. Every act of gathering felt like defiance. Each meal, no matter how small, was a victory against the wild. At night, Elijah wrote in his weathered notebook, sketches of plants, notes about tracks, and bits of advice for whoever might come after him. "Learn the taste of the land," he wrote, "for it may feed you when nothing else will." By mid-December, the wagon train broke apart. Some turned back toward St. Louis, their hopes buried under snow. Elijah pressed on with a smaller group, driving his mules north toward a line of cottonwoods that marked the river valley. They built rough shelters from logs and sod, sealing the cracks with mud that froze solid by morning. The wind howled through the night like a ghost, rattling the walls. Inside, the air smelled of smoke and sweat and desperation. One evening, as the storm gathered strength, Elijah sat near the fire with his rifle across his knees. His breath fogged in the air. Outside, the world had disappeared into white. He thought of home, of warm bread and laughter and summer rain. Then he looked at the slab of venison hanging near the fire and knew that memory would not keep him alive. Action would. He took his knife and began to slice the meat thin, each cut precise, deliberate. He threaded the strips onto a stick and held them over the smoke. Slowly, the air filled with the sharp scent of curing flesh, and the color darkened to deep mahogany. It was a simple act, one repeated by generations before him. A lesson borrowed from tribes and trappers alike, but in that moment, it felt sacred. The snow thickened outside, whispering against the roof. Elijah turned the meat, his hands steady though the fire burned low. He knew the process well. Dry it with smoke, keep it away from damp, and it would last for months. Smoke was both weapon and guardian. It drove away insects, hardened the meat, and sealed in life itself. Tomorrow, he would hunt again. Tomorrow, he would check his traps along the creek. Tomorrow, he would endure. By dawn, the storm had buried the valley. The trees stood heavy with frost, their branches glistening like glass. Elijah stepped outside, his boots sinking deep. The world was silent except for the slow creak of ice on the river. He looked out across the frozen land and felt something between awe and fear. Out here, a man was small. But if he learned the rhythms of the wild, when to move, when to rest, what to eat and what to leave, he could belong to it. That morning, he found one of his snares sprung. A snowshoe hare hung there, stiff and still. He knelt beside it, whispered a quiet word of thanks, and carried it back to camp. The others watched as he skinned it with practiced care, saving every scrap, meat for stew, hide for cord, bones for tools. Nothing wasted. Nothing taken without purpose. When night fell again, the settlers gathered around Elijah's fire. The meat dried above the flames, the scent of wood smoke and fat mingling in the cold. A small comfort, but enough to lift their spirits. They spoke softly of the spring to come, of green grass and open water. Elijah listened, silent but steady, his mind fixed on the simple truth the land had taught him. That survival was not about strength or luck, but knowledge, the kind passed hand to hand, voice to voice, from the old world into the new. As the fire burned low, he added another log and checked the strips of venison. The smoke curled upward, warm and slow, painting his face in amber light. Beyond the circle of firelight, the wilderness stretched forever. Somewhere in the darkness, a wolf called, long, low, and mournful. Elijah looked into the flames and knew the test had only begun. The true trial of hunger was still ahead, and the wilderness, patient and vast, would demand every skill he possessed. Fade to black, the fire crackles, and the story drifts toward the next chapter: fire, smoke, and salt.